Dear Heavenly Father, thank you, good Lord, for this afternoon session you've given to us. Thank you, Lord, the blessings you have showered upon us. Guide us today, Lord, as we discuss our lesson about forensic psychology. Give the presenters wisdom and understanding our God and strength, and may we bring honor and glory into your name, Lord, and we dedicate this class to your name. Amen. Okay, I'm currently recording this session so that those who missed this session will be able to watch it too. And also, after this report, to um I'm going to check the attendance. Okay. Tapos after sa forensic psychology, may another attendance naman. May 15-minute break na before ang next nga presenter, which is ang family psychology. Sige, so without further ado, let's welcome the group of Miss Senor Sarsoa Sevilla Sich and Salvidio for their presentation of forensic psychology. Sige, you have the floor now.
Hello, bation ko? Okay ba ng audio?
Yes po.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. Our topic this afternoon is forensic psychology. What is forensic psychology? It focuses on the study of human behavior and the application of clinical psychology to the legal system. This means that forensic psychology is a field that combines the practice of psychology and the law. The word forensic, derived from the Latin "forensis", means forum, the place where trials were conducted in Roman times, or the court system of ancient Rome. The current use of forensic denotes a relationship between one professional field, such as medicine, pathology, chemistry, anthropology, or psychology, with the legal system. In our case, we have forensic psychology, the relationship between psychology and the legal system. Many people equate forensic psychology with forensic science or law enforcement. However, I hate to break it to you, but forensic psychologists are rarely called to investigate crime scenes or enforce the law. Actually, only 10% of forensic psychologists and psychiatrists have ever engaged in criminal profiling. Those people that we see in movies who investigate crime scenes that made us interested in forensic psychology are actually scientists and not forensic psychologists. Moving on, there are two major areas of forensic psychology. First is the criminal law, and second is the civil law. The first major area is the criminal law. Criminal law focuses on acts against society in general. It is the government's responsibility to pursue criminal matters through law enforcement officers and prosecutors. The focus of criminal law is to punish offenders, to maintain a societal sense of justice, and deter crime. It is the responsibility of forensic psychologists to assist the court in identifying if the defendants are suffering from a mental illness that prohibits them from forming mens rea, which refers to criminal intent, or the literal translation from Latin is guilty mind. And if their mental illness prohibits them from forming mens rea, it means that they are not legally responsible for the crime. With the help of forensic psychologists, they will identify if the defendant has a mental illness that stops them from knowing that their actions can cause a crime. And if this is the case, the defendant is not legally responsible for the crime. Next, we have here the areas of forensic practice in criminal law. The first area is risk assessment at the time of sentencing. Risk assessment is the process of using risk factors to estimate the likelihood of an outcome occurring in a population. The population consists of the convicted offenders, and the outcome is the tendency of the offender to reoffend. What the forensic psychologists do is provide analysis and risk assessment at the time of sentencing to explain why an offense has occurred and the likelihood of it occurring again in the future. Forensic psychology assessment uses structured professional tools, psychometric measures, and formulation to understand the psychological aspect of why people behaved in the way they did. And because it is a risk assessment, they also provide advice about the likelihood of the offender to reoffend and what can be done to prevent future offenses. Next area, we have the insanity and criminal responsibility. Criminal responsibility means accountability for one's action to criminal law. The test of criminal responsibility is the rules of law that determine the guilt of those who cause certain injuries, carefully defined by law to individuals or society in general. This means that criminal responsibility can be affected by insanity. The role of the forensic psychologist is to assist the court in determining if an individual was legally insane, meaning not criminally responsible during the time of crime. Forensic psychologists also evaluate the defendant's mental condition and provide reports or testimonies about the defendant's criminal responsibility. In summary, there is a relationship between the defendant's mental state and criminal responsibility. If the defendant was legally insane during the time of crime, they are not criminally responsible. But if they were sane, obviously they are criminally responsible. Next area is competency to stand trial. A defendant cannot be convicted of a crime if they are not mentally competent to stand trial because this would violate constitutional protections for defendants by denying them the right to a fair trial. Competency to stand trial involves being able to understand the proceedings and play the role in their defense. Regardless of how strong the prosecution evidence may be, if there is a lack of competency, it forms a barrier to a trial and conviction. An important distinction to understand is that a competency determination applies to the defendant's current mental state rather than their mental state at the time of committing the alleged crime. So the difference between Area 2, insanity and criminal responsibility, and Area 3, competency to stand trial, is that Area 2, insanity and criminal responsibility, they focuses on the mental state of the defendant during the time of crime, while Area 3, competency to stand trial, focuses on the mental state of the defendant during the trial. So the responsibility of forensic psychologists is to write evaluation reports addressing competency to stand trial, including the description of mental disability and to what extent this disability can impair the ability of the defendant to understand the proceedings.
Good afternoon, everyone. So let's proceed to Area 4, the treatment of sexual offenders. Audible man ka?
Yes, Kate.
Thank you. So, treatment of sexual offenders. Sexual offender treatment is a process by which offenders learn strategies for stopping abusive behavior and taking responsibility for the harm that they have done. So, sex offense counseling or treatment is important to reduce recidivism. What does it mean by recidivism? It means the tendency of a convicted criminal to reoffend or the act of repeating the same offense. So, researchers about sex offender treatment focus on examining whether suitable treatment exists or whether sex offenders are responsive to such treatments and whether such treatments work. So, sexual offending has been recognized as a serious problem with significant impacts on victims and their families and the society in general. So the current best practice involves the application of cognitive behavioral interventions that target the risks that adhere to the effectiveness of the CBT. So what is cognitive behavioral therapy? The cognitive behavioral therapy approach, which involves an integration of both cognitive and behavioral therapy techniques, has been adapted for use with sexual offenders. So behavioral therapies believe that deviance is learned behavior that can be unlearned. Thus, deviant or inappropriate sexual desire might be reduced if associated with negative consequences, while appropriate sexual desire might be enhanced if paired with rewards. Although there is some debate regarding whether treatment with sexual offenders is effective, CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy remains the most widely accepted and empirically supported model of sexual offenders treatment with respect to reducing recidivism. And with the cognitive behavioral theory, it suggests that people's thoughts, emotions, body sensations, and behavior are all connected. If one of these is altered, the others will change too. So, in practical application, CBT involves changing the attitudes, challenging the cognitive distortions, addressing general self regulation skills such as public solving, improving sexual, intimate, and social relationships, developing adaptive cognition process, and addressing self-regulation such as reducing the deviant sexual arousal. Next, meets. So next is the area 5, the juvenile transfer to adult court. So juvenile transfer to adult court is a process where youths who are viewed as inappropriate for the juvenile justice system are transferred to adult court. So what does it mean by a juvenile court? It is a court system that handles complaints against children who are alleged to delinquent or undisciplined. So the two justice system, the adult court and the juvenile court, are very different from each other. So the juvenile justice system includes far more educational and rehabilitative program. Their services are designed to help the youth accept their responsibility while addressing their underlying criminal charges. The juvenile is better able to involve in family and other caring adults in those services. Plus, they offer activities and opportunities that allow the youth to grow in a healthy way. For example, in the state of California in the USA, the term transfer refers to sending the youth charged with a crime committed when under age of 18 from the juveniles justice system to the adult system. So there are cases nga habang even wala pa sila kalabot sa 18 years old, they are already transferred to the adult court. Or in some situation, a juvenile court judge may determine that a juvenile has waived the protection of being tried in a juvenile court. As a result, the judge may transfer their case in the adult court. This also happen when a juvenile is a repeat offender, since the penalties imposed in the juvenile justice system may be insufficient or kulang para i-correct ila wrongdoings. So, ang focus sang juvenile is they focus more on rehabilitation. So, but a conviction in adult court can result to more harsh penalties and sometimes involving mandatory sentences or performing community service. Or in other words, juveniles in adult court can receive harsher penalties such as life imprisonment. So, adult courts are more formal than the juvenile court. So, forensic psychologists assist in considering the various transfer factors of a person, such as his mental health history and amenability to rehabilitation. Forensic psychologists also help in educating the court about adolescent development and other relevant topics that can be beneficial in making decisions.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So the second major area is civil law. Are you hearing me, guys? Audible
Yes,
ko.
Liz.
Okay, thank you. Next, please. Okay, so civil law, it is a violation of civil law is considered as a wrong against an individual. So civil law is considered with private rights and remedies, not necessarily the public good. In civil law, one party, which is a plaintiff, must bring action against someone who has violated his rights, which is the defendant. So okay guys. So civil law, civil. Ang civil, it is derived from the Latin civilis, which means citizen. So it is a body of laws that delineate private rights and remedies and give and govern disputes between individuals in such areas as contracts, property, and family law. So, ang civil law, nag-deals ni siya with cases where wrong is done against a particular individual, and it is in also cases that which private citizen or companies sue each other in court. Civil law is the part of country's set of laws which is concerned with the private affairs of citizens, for example, marriage and property ownership rather than with crime. Next, please. So, principles of civil law is first the tort. This falls within civil law and consists of a wrongful act that causes harm to an individual. Furthermore, it is up to that harmed individual, not society, to take action. So, this tort is sometimes called as civil cases or vice versa. So, yun nga, it involves plaintiff who claims that the defendant harmed him or her in some way. So the harm, it could be physical, such as when a person is injured in an auto accident, or it could be emotional, such as a harassment or discrimination case. In these cases, what is called the trier or fact, on usually the jury, must take two findings. First, the defendant do wrong or liability, and if so, what kind of damage resulted to the plaintiff damages. So, guys, let me give you two examples of civil cases which is cracked by forensic psychology. So, first is Ted Bundy. He is a serial killer which killed 19 women, possibly more, wherein several forensic psychologists used their expertise to crack this famous case. Over time, Ted Bundy's brutal attacks and killings became less careful and more frequent. Their psychological profile, which benefited greatly from a former girlfriend's information, eventually ended the nationwide manhunt for Bundy and even linked him to other unsolved murders. And then the other one is John Wayne Gacy, or the killer clown. So the forensic psychologists ensured that the culprit in this famous case didn't go free on a bogus insanity plea. Through a series of interviews, psychologists on the case were able to determine that Gacy's murder involved premeditation and a detailed plan to hide his victims' bodies. Okay.
So, negligence when an individual falls below an ordinary or reasonable level of care. So, negligence is the person responsible for committing a wrong, is careless, and therefore responsible for the harm this carelessness caused to another. It occurred when the defendant's actions were unreasonably unsafe. So, for example, as drivers on public roads have a duty to follow the rules, it is their obligation as a licensed driver to do so. So, if a driver travels over the speed limit, they have acted negligently. If they hit someone and hurt them, they have committed a negligence tort and likely owe the victim for their losses. Another example, if a restaurant owner does not clearly mark a broken step at his establishment and a diner is injured, the restaurant owner may be found guilty of negligence. Next, please. So, Areas of forensic practice in civil law. So, child custody. Child custody evaluations may be the most complex, difficult, and challenging of all forensic evaluations. So, this involves the evaluation of numerous parties with respect to multiple issues or capacities. The evaluator must assess at a minimum the two parents contesting custody and their child or children. There are significant others involved and evaluation of them is required. Opinions offered by these expert evaluators then go to inform the legal decision maker's judgment about the physical custody or placement of the children, as well as who will be involved in making important life decisions for the children. So there are four aspects in child custody. First is legal custody. So it gives a parent the right to make long-term decisions about the raising of a child. So it determines who will make major decisions affecting the child, including the child's education, medical care, dental care. So the legal custody is awarded to both parents. A history of drug abuse, domestic violence, or child neglect would play a role in this decision, which is focused on what's best for the child. For example, the mother and the father have divorced. So due in large part to father's substance abuse and addiction, the mother seeks and is granted legal custody of child. So this means that the mother alone has legal authority to decide key issues related to child's upbringing, and the father has no legal right to participate in the decision-making process. Next, physical custody. So the physical custody has to do with where the child will live. So if one parent is granted sole physical custody, the child will reside with that parent. So for example, the mother and the father have divorced and share legal custody of child. So while mother is giving physical custody of child. So this usually means that both parents share equally in making important decisions concerning child's upbringing. But childs live with the mother for the majority of the time, as in most cases where one parent is awarded physical custody, the father is given visitation rights as the non-custodial parent. Kag pwede lang magbisita ang father sa iya bata ang every other weekend, summer vacation, or holidays. So next is joint custody. So joint custody sharing both physical and legal custody. So in this arrangement, the child will spend some portion of time living with each parent, and the parents will cooperatively make decisions about the child's upbringing and welfare, similar to when they were married. So for example, the mother and the father arrange a schedule where child lives with each parent for 1 month at a time. And they agree that they will decide together on all major issues concerning child's welfare. So they share legal custody of child. So this means that both parents share equally in making important decisions concerning child's upbringing and welfare. And the last is grandparent custody. So state laws tend to favor grandparent custody. In the event the biological custodial parents are unfit to care for the child or are deceased. So for example, if a grandparent can show that a parent is abusive, unfit, or incompetent, courts are far more willing to grant permissive rights to grandparents if it's in the best interest of the child. Next, please.
Okay, so the second area is civil commitment. Forensic psychologists in civil courts frequently assess mental competency, serve as alternate expert witnesses, and private psychotherapy to crime victims. Those in criminal courts conduct evaluations of competency to stand trial, work with witnesses rather to crimes, and provide an assessment of juvenile and adult offenders for sentencing. The forensic psychologist thinks of assessments and uses these assessments to reach a diagnosis and conclude. So, civil commitment. So the civil commitment, for example, guys, a defendant is not psychologically sound, and it has a danger that brings to others and itself. So the psychologist rather has a civil commitment to subject that defendant to involuntarily hospitalization. So other meaning of civil commitment. So it refers to involuntary hospitalization or mandated treatment of mentally ill individuals who need care and incap- incapacitation because they exhibit a violent tendency towards themselves and others. This civil commitment has a criteria which is mentally ill and dangerous people. It intrudes on the fundamental interest in being free of internal restraint, so patients are subjected to detailed regulation of their every activity, and they are focused to submit to various forms of intrusive treatment, including psychotropic medication, which may cause severe and unwanted side effects that are lasting. Okay, so next, please. So third area is the personal injury.
So, a
So
personal injury occurs when a person's body, mind, or emotions are injured as a result of the negligence, carelessness, or wrongful conduct of another person, which allows an injured person to file a civil lawsuit in court and get a legal remedy for all losses stemming from an accident or other incident. So different categories of personal injury or tort litigation include claims against providers of professional services, claims against employers for discriminatory hiring processes, negligent treatment, workplace harassment, or physical injury on the job, and claims against manufacturers or suppliers of products. So psychologists may become involved in personal injury claims at any several points. The most common application in forensic psychology is when the plaintiff claims mental health injury beyond that which would normally be expected to occur under the alleged circumstances. So the plaintiff generally offers expert testimony to support that claim. So, personal injury law is an area of civil law concerned with providing monetary compensation to victims of accidents or social wrongs. It covers any case in which someone has been injured or killed due to the negligence or carelessness of another. So the person who committed the act of negligence should be held liable or responsible in causing the other person's injury. Examples are car and truck accidents. So in these cases, a driver or passenger has been hurt or killed in a collision with a car or another vehicle. Another example, vehicle equipment failures. So in these accidents, defective equipment such as tires, seat belts, or airbags malfunction, causing someone's injury or death, and medical malpractice. So this type of personal injury involves someone being harmed, injured, or killed due to negligence on the part of a healthcare professional, such as failure to diagnose a serious condition, improper treatment, or use of an unsafe medical procedure. And last, product liability cases. So these cases seek compensation in situation when a defective or recalled product or medication causes someone's illness, injury, or death. Next, please.
So the area four, which is a workers' compensation. So in a workers' compensation case, any employee injured in the job is entitled to workers' compensation benefits with some very limited exemptions. So workers' compensation has nothing to do with fault. You don't need to prove that your employer or your coworkers did anything wrong in order for you to receive workers' compensation benefits. Even if you were negligent and your negligence caused your injury, you're still entitled to receive workers' compensation benefits. So the psychologist may be called upon to conduct a psychological evaluation, which includes objective testing to determine the patient's current level of psychological functioning, address the impact of the injury to the current conditions, determine appropriateness for medical procedures, evaluate barriers to success, and provide recommendations for psychological care. So, okay, so in workers' compensation cases, main issue is casualty. So, the psychologists, diba, they evaluate or seek or determine if a person or a person's employment naga-cause or greatly naga-contribute sa ila nga injury. So the injury might be physical, it could be psychological, or both. So the evaluation assess whether psychological damage resulted from the injury and if so, to what extent. So the cause of injury or illness need not be related directly or indirectly to the work setting. In contrast, workers' compensation is designed to provide financial relief to an employee who is injured or becomes ill as a direct result of work related factors. Whether the injury is due to the employer's negligence or the employee's, the compensation is the same. So, for example, BPO industry, those who work under this industry, sometimes those customers they face sometimes it can cause emotional damage, so ang emotional nga na it could be an injury and that should be included to a workers compensation. It could be negligence man siya or hindi or intentional man siya. As an employer dapat need mo man i-compensate ang imo nga employees for that as well. Pero mo na. And next please. So the last area of civil law is area 5, competency to make medical decisions. So it is a capacity to consent to treatment, also known as treatment consent capacity or TCC. It is a fundamental aspect of personal autonomy and self-determination and refers to a person's cognitive and emotional capacity to consent to medical decision-making capacity. It also involves the capacity not only to accept treatment but also to refuse treatment or to select between treatment alternatives. So, from a legal standpoint, the TCC is a distinctive civil capacity. Issues of TCC generally arise in the medical setting and usually involve a physician, a psychologist, or some other clinician, not a legal professional, as a decision maker. These clinical judgments of TCC are rarely subject to judicial review. Next slide, please. However, a more formal capacity evaluation should be considered if there is reason to question a patient's decision-making abilities. Such reasons include an acute change in mental status, refusal of a clearly beneficial recommended treatment, risk factors for impaired decision-making, or readily agreeing to an invasive or risky procedure without adequately considering the risks and benefits. Any physician can evaluate capacity, and a structured approach is best. Several formal assessment tools are available to help with the capacity evaluation. Consultation with a psychiatrist may be helpful in some cases, but the final determination on capacity is made by the treating physician. So, and TCC is often using four standards drawn from case law and the psychiatric literature. And these capacities are evidence or express a treatment choice. Next is appreciate the personal consequences of a treatment choice. the reason about treatment ni siya or the reasoning and understand which is the treatment situation and choices, there's actually a fifth consent ability of making a reasonable treatment choice or the reasonable choice which is used experimentally but not clinically. So one of examples of this, like in civil cases, there is sa mga makita naman in television, kung kisa mga case bala like ang bata or ang isa kadalaga mentally ano siya unstable or ang way of thinking niya is bata pa sa age niya. So in that way, those physician nga naga-diagnose or naga-treat sang ina nga plaintiff nga nagaano sa court, it can be the doctors or the physician can be the witness na if that plaintiff is liable or like pwede siya ano bala ang iya nga what do you call this ang iya nga mahambal or ang iya nga i-subject to tell sa court is pwede bala paniwalaan or is it true enough ba nga ma-subject ang iya nga defendant which is kay siya ang makadetermine ang capacity sang ina nga plaintiff. Okay, that's all for this area. Thank you.
So now I will be discussing the theories related to forensic psychology. Next slide, please. First, we have the cognitive behavioral theory. So this theory focuses mostly on how particular thoughts lead to certain feelings, which in turn leads to various behavioral reactions. Thoughts are flexible, and by altering them, we may alter our feelings and consequently our behavior. This is also applicable vice versa. The theory assumes that cognitive distortions, which is basically inaccurate thinking, it induces psychological distress, which causes people to lose touch with reality, and they psychologically torment themselves with self created untruth. So, the theory, as applied to crime and delinquency, posits that social behavior is learned. For example, when children see parents use aggression as a form of discipline, they begin to view aggression as a style of conflict resolution. Often, the environment teaches and reinforces skills that are antisocial and destructive. The cognitive behavioral approach aids delinquents in learning new socially appropriate skills, in recognizing and solving their problems or conflicts. Next slide, please. So next we have Eysenck's criminal personality theory. So there are key personality traits that are present within an offender's personality. This theory helps in understanding the defendant's reasons for offending. Moreover, it helps forensic psychologists identify possible future offenders and can help during risk assessment for the likelihood of the offender to reoffend. So Hans Eysenck's theory of criminal personality suggests that personality is biologically based and that personality traits include dimensions of extroversion and neuroticism that can be measured using a personality questionnaire. First, extroversion refers to a biological need individuals have for high or low levels of environmental stimulation, determined by the level of arousal in a person's central and autonomic nervous system. Basically, this means that people with high levels of extroversion have low levels of arousal, meaning they require more environmental stimulation to fuel their excitement. In the context of forensic psychology, this environmental stimulation may include criminal behavior. Second, neuroticism refers to the stability of personality, and a high neuroticism score would represent someone who is more reactive and volatile, and perhaps more likely to engage in offending behavior. Lastly, Eysenck then added a third personality dimension, psychoticism, which relates to the degree to which someone is antisocial, aggressive, and uncaring. Next slide, please. We have Robert Merton's strain theory, and this theory states that society puts pressure on individuals to achieve socially accepted goals. Though they lack the means, this leads to strain, which may also lead the individuals to commit crimes. The two major concerns of this theory are one, the sources of the strain or stress, and number two, how people adapt to the strain. So the pressures heightened unpleasant emotions, which then puts pressure on the people to take corrective actions. So the majority of these corrective acts take in the form of illegal activities, which are used to relieve stress or avenge the source of stress. For example, individuals experiencing maybe chronic unemployment may engage in theft or drug selling to obtain money, seek revenge against the person who fired them, or maybe take illicit drugs in an effort to feel better. Next slide, please. And lastly, we have Karl Marx's conflict theory. So it claims that humankind will always be in conflict as a result of society's incessant competition for scarce resources. So this theory explores every social phenomenon through the perspective of conflict as an innate human instinct. Conflict is an inevitable component of human nature, which explains why things are the way they are. So the conflict theory is all about inequality in society. It proposes that laws and norms reflect interests of powerful members of society. For example, the conflict theory can be used to look at wars, violence, revolutions, and forms of injustice and discrimination by explaining that there is a natural disparity in society that causes these problems. Next slide, please.
Next, we have here the practice of forensic psychology in the Philippines. According to Cabrera, the common observations regarding forensic psychology and its practice here in the Philippines are the following. First, forensic psychology is an emerging field of psychological practice in the Philippines, which is largely dominated by licensed professionals whose expertise are in social work, psychology, and guidance and counseling. The definition of forensic psychology has not been made known to many. That is why we often interchange it with forensic science. For, Foreign authored forensic books are hard to find, and Filipino authored forensic psychology books are nowhere to be found. And this is probably one of the reasons why forensic psychology has not yet been made known to many. Next, forensic psychology was only previously offered as an academic subject in graduate degrees in the University of Santo Tomas. Thus, it is given that seminars and conferences on this field has not been heard of. Forensic psychology as a specialty in professional psychology has not been fully established, which means that its practitioners are still few. Okay.
Next is, in addition, here are some of the observations regarding the forensic psychology and its practice in the Philippines. So, the directory of foreign experts has not yet been circulated. So, an association of psychologists engaged in forensic practice has not been formed. The Philippine ethical guidelines specifying its practitioner shave not been formulated. So its practice is more associated with the application of clinical psychology to law, and its practitioners are usually confined to legal actions or defenses or the declaration of absolute nullity of marriage on the ground of psychological incapacity and petitions or defenses for child custody. However, trends indicate that courts in the Philippines are gradually moving toward those links and activities practiced abroad. That means that the Philippines are also adapting. So, in addition, Far Eastern University in Manila has finally offered the first and the only graduate program in forensic psychology in the country. So, they offer PhD in psychology, major in forensic psychology. Also, there is already a growing number of practicing psychologists who can be regarded as forensic psychologists, although most of them have specialized primarily in clinical psychology. So, the major areas of practice of forensic psychology in the Philippines are in line with the cases on violence against women and children, child custody evaluations, competency assessment to stand in trials, and annulment of marriage. All of this existing information and literature about the current state of the professional practice of forensic psychology in the country served as a good starting point to examine the current trends and future directions of the discipline in the Philippines. Thank you.
So now we have the current trends in forensic psychology. Next slide, please. So these are the recent trends throughout 2020 and 2021. Next slide, please. So first off, we have raising our voices on gun violence in 2020. So the APA and psychology are collaborating on a variety of facets to effectively take the gun violence controversy beyond political debate and into the domain of public health and safety. So according to recent studies, mental illness contributes to a modest fraction of gun violence. And people with severe mental illnesses are far more likely to be victims than perpetrators of such assaults. Gun violence, like other public health crises such as smoking and vehicle accidents, is effectively handled through public health measures. This is because, according to clinical and forensic psychologist and attorney Robert Kinskerf of William James College, this strategy is apolitical, based on research and facts, aimed to encourage population level health and targeted to specific subpopulations. Next, please. Moreover, in 2020, we also have pioneering new ways to protect privacy. So as more psychologists' profession becomes technological, the risk of unintentionally disclosing people's confidential details grows. Hence, psychologists are now focused on developing new strategies to protect users' data. Nowadays, patients are utilizing smartphone apps to track and manage illnesses such as depression, substance use disorders, obesity, and schizophrenia. However, some rarely read the terms and conditions to determine if their data is secure. The emergence of mental health apps for those dealing with illnesses such as depression, anxiety, or schizophrenia has also jeopardized personal data confidentiality, which is a significant concern to health professionals. Next slide, please. So in 2021, we have psychology's involvement in policing. Police departments are now turning to new research and interventions. On several aspects, psychologists are addressing unnecessarily violent, racially prejudiced police. The field of psychology has played a role in advancing and promoting public policy related to social justice issues that support improving the lives and well-being of the society, which also contributes to promoting effective law enforcement behaviors and strategies. So, given the current state of affairs between law enforcement and many communities across the world, the need for psychologists to contribute solutions becomes increasingly more important. Next slide, please. In 2021, we also have online therapy. So as the use of telepsychology grows, psychologists need to be aware of its general privacy and security risks, such as the possibility of data breaches, and they have to take steps to minimize them. So analysts believe that with telehealth utilization rates increasing, overcoming issues regarding privacy and security, accessibility of services, and service payments will be crucial since many psychologists transition to delivering treatment virtually amid the current COVID-19 crisis. So psychologists must be mindful of general privacy and security issues. such as the likelihood of data breaches, and they should also take precautions to alleviate them. And that includes our report on forensic psychology. Thank you.
Hello, hello. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. So, I have just a few questions. So, while you are researching your topic about forensic psychology, what surprised you or what discoveries or insight have you learned about forensic psychology?
I have one, ma'am.
Okay, sige.
Amo to ang difference sang forensic psychology and forensic science kay we usually interchange the both of them.
Mm-mm.
And personally, isa man sa reasons why I became interested in forensic psychology is that because I thought nga amo na ay ang gas gaara sige sila bla permi sa investigations ng crime scenes pero actually only 10% lang gali sang forensic psychologists or psychiatrists ang naga-engage sa criminal profiling kag ang aton nga perception sang forensic psychologist is actually more on sa forensic science, sa
Mm-mm.
scientist. Thank
Okay.
you.
Sige. So, any more from your classmate who would like to add? Mga insights about forensic psychology? Okay. Wala. Okay. Sige. So, lang, I would just also like to add na, oo, so far rin man in the Philippines that there is no established, for example, special interest group or division sa PAP, which is the Psychological Association of the Philippines. Ang professional organization naton as psychologists and psychometricians nga about sa forensic psychology gid. So, and yeah, very different gid practice there is sa Philippines because most of those who go to court nga mga psychologist na matawag man naton nga forensic psychologists are clinical psychologists and nga practitioners. So they and also assessment. So dara man gasulod ang aton role as assessment as psychometrician sa assessment when it comes to court cases, especially sa annulment because sa annulment kailangan ma-prove mo ang for example psychological incapacity and also ang hambal to gani ang sa trial kung carry ba nga maka-stand sa trial ang isa ka tawo. Also ang mga adoption cases, custody cases. So we are assessing not only the welfare of the child nga gina nga in question but also the parents preparedness. So ang aton role as assessment psychologists or psychometricians is to help them assess their psychological capacity as parents, as guardians, especially gid sa mga adoption and mga custody cases. Okay? So, any more from the class, from your group who would like to add insight? Okay, wala naman. Sige. So, I will just check your attendance. So, this is, this is, ang attendance sa is for the October 14, which is ang Thursday. And then, ang later, ang October 15. Ang sa Monday naton, ang attendance nga na is ang last week ang 8 kag ang 9. Okay? Para, I mean, ang 7 kag ang 8 para hindi ka mo, inform nyo lang ang classmates nyo para hindi sila ma-confuse kung mag-ask sila about sa attendance. Okay, so, since we are early, at least we can go back mag 2:30 karon. So let me check first your attendance. Amiel, Abagatnan. Ara siya. Wala. Alegre,
Present, ma'am.
Alvior,
Present, ma'am.
Aquines, Banat,
Present, ma'am.
Barbo,
Present, ma'am.
okay.